I'm very focused on what we need to deliver, which is one, making sure that UK regulatory and legal framework remains effective, remains competitive internationally with the innovation that's going on around the world. So I should say that the views of this interview are my own, and they're not by any means representative of the government that I'm speaking.
Welcome to T-Minus Space Daily, coming to you from Commercial Space Week. And I have a very special guest with me now, Paul. Hi.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Would you mind telling our audience a little bit about you?
Yep. So my name is Paul Cremin. I'm head of Spaceflight at the UK Department of Transport. I've been in the space program for 14 years, but been in Department of Transport for 20 years. At that time, I've been head of airspace, head of safety for commercial aviation, head of unmanned systems across Whitehall, and then in my more recent post, responsible for the legal and regulatory framework for the UK space sector, and obviously responsible for sponsoring the Civil Aviation Authority and launch safety.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Paul. There is so much going on in UK space. I feel like every day on T-Minus, we're covering something new and exciting that's happening in the UK space sector. New licensing, spaceport developments. I mean, there's so much going on. I think it speaks so much to just the incredible industry that's happening in UK space. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's I remember in 2014, the UK Space Agency came to me and said, we want to do launch in the UK.
Yeah.
How do we do that? And of course, you go through the process of trying to understand what other countries are doing.
Yeah.
The obvious place to go was the US to see what the US were doing at the time. And of course, your own industry here is phenomenal and going on in leaps and bounds. But the problem with the US system compared with what we wanted in the UK was that we wanted to take a wholly commercial approach. And US regulations and environment, of course, were grown out of a state-sponsored launch program. We wanted to take the best of what you did, but go much further.
So wholly commercial, that's an interesting approach. I don't know if I've actually thought about that before. Why commercial first? Or wholly commercial, actually,
Partly because the UK government doesn't spend the same sort of money on space as the US does.
Right,
it can't compete. Right. So obviously we're looking for people that would like the opportunity to invest, grow, and thrive. We had to develop a legal and regulatory framework. So, in fact, my team were responsible with that, working with the UK Space Agency and Civil Aviation Authority at the time to work out how we would do that. And then, of course, not only did we have to create a legal and regulatory framework, but we had to create a new regulator for space. And, there were multiple options to consider, but ultimately we chose the Civil Aviation Authority because of they're a world-respected regulator. And they took across a number of people from the UK Space Agency, so they brought some skills in. And since then, they've been developing those skills. And of course, they're now issuing orbital licenses.
Yes, yep.
Spaceport licenses and launch operator licenses. And of course, in the UK, we now have 2 spaceports with licenses.
Yeah.
We have Spaceport Cornwall, who was the first in the UK to get a spaceport license. And more recently, last year, Saxonwood Spaceport. And the difference is Newquay or Spaceport Cornwall is a horizontal launch spaceport.
Indeed. Yeah. Yep.
And Saxe-Ford Spaceport, which is right in the north, the furthest north you can get in UK, is a vertical launch spaceport.
Yeah.
And so we're very excited to see operations start soon.
Yeah, and having sovereign launch access is paramount for domestic launch and rocket makers and all these different industries that crop up around that. And there's been a lot of funding news about that recently. Actually, I think we just reported on some of that just recently. Orbex, a big funding infusion there, if I'm remembering that one correctly, and then RFA as well. With launch licensing. So, I mean, that's fantastic developments there.
It is. And, these companies need a boost to make sure that they are sustainable and that they can get to where they want to get to. So both the Scottish government and UK government are helping those launch companies with a bit of seed funding to get where they are. So when I talk about wholly commercial funding, it's fair to say we do give a little bit of funding, but it's not on the same scale as what we're seeing in the US. But those spaceports need to be sustainable. They need to attract business partners and, of course, launch operators to make them work.
And one could argue with it being a wholly commercial enterprise, and you have really viable businesses as opposed to being propped up by government funding.
Yeah, and it's hard for any startup. There's a lot of investment that goes in, and those investors want to see a quick return on those investments.
Yeah.
And of course, the regulatory process, the licensing process are long things. There are long lead-in times.
Yeah.
And that costs money.
Yeah.
And so they have to be able to demonstrate that they have those skills, that they have the right aptitude to be able to do the things that they want to do.
And I would imagine also in some cases that they can wait until the licensing process completes. That can be perilous for some companies.
Yeah, and I think one of the challenges for industry is making sure that they're technically ready. What we find often with new start launch companies and other companies is that what they say to their investors is often, they'll say, stretched from where they really are in the process. And once they get into that regulatory process, it sometimes takes a little bit of time to adjust.
Indeed.
And that sometimes causes delay in where they are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Shifting focus a little bit, something that I remember we've been looking at in the last year or so were sort of the space clusters that were developed and announced a lot last year, and it sounds like maybe the cluster model is being deprecated slightly, if I understand a bit. Yeah.
I'm not sure that's true. I think spaceports need multiple businesses to make it sustainable and work. It's fair to say you don't make money purely from launch, and you need to diversify activities to draw in revenues that support those launch. So, I'm a big fan of seeing clusters develop around the space business.
Yeah. So it's been really fascinating to hear that different clusters have certain areas of expertise. I've been very fascinated hearing about the ones that are satellite focused, especially. It's a personal interest of mine. I'm curious if there are any that you're specifically maybe keeping an eye on, that you have favorites.
Well, the UK is very lucky in the sense that it has the second largest manufacturer of CubeSats outside of California.
Yeah. Yes.
And I don't think a lot of people know that.
They do not.
Globally. Equally, the UK has, it did maybe until recently, the second, maybe the third now, largest number of satellites orbiting, outside of, I think China has only just eclipsed the UK. Yeah. But of course, OneWeb being a UK company means that we have a lot of small satellites operating up in constellations up in space.
Absolutely, yeah. When you look at the growth in the UK space sector in general, and the different funding infusions that have come in and certain areas of focus, what personally is of interest to you right now?
Well, the area that I work in is launch. So I'm very focused. I'm very focused on what we need to deliver, which is one, making sure that UK regulatory and legal framework remains effective, remains competitive internationally with the innovation that's going on around the world. So, we're continually assessing what we need to do to make sure that we're accommodating the industry's needs. And that's a challenge because often industry are way ahead of where the regulations often need to be. And there is a bit of a catch-up that we need to do. But
what are you hearing from industry, if you don't mind me asking?
I think we get a mixed reaction from industry. Obviously, industry, I often think that regulations and the regulator are an easy target sometimes for industry. There are things that we can always do for better, that's for sure. But I do feel that sometimes the criticism leveled at the regulator and regulations is a bit unfair.
More understanding the process,
particularly for new startups, I think understanding, new startups, they often come from an engineering pool or a university.
Right.
And, for them, obviously, they're very immersed in what they do.
Right, the technical solution, yes.
But actually, to step out and then understand the legal and regulatory framework they are then operating in is sometimes a challenge for them.
So it sounds like there's definitely some work to be done, at least within the industry, for better educating and enabling that access.
And for us too. We need to make sure that our guidance is clear, that people understand it. I think getting a balance between those companies that want a really prescriptive approach to regulation, and some do, compared with others that want scope to be innovative and grow, is getting a challenge. And we kind of have to hit both, and that's not always easy.
For our industry partners and people who are listening in who want to work more closely doing launch in the UK, what would be your advice for them?
So first of all, UK is a very exciting place to come at the moment. We've got one spaceport online now that's talking to multiple customers. We're expecting our first vertical launch later this year, and potentially the second one not far after. We have other options for spaceports that will be coming online in the next 2 or 3 years. I think the UK is a great opportunity, a great place to come and work. We have great access to polar orbits. We have great access to the European market, which is on our doorstep, as well as the UK market. We have some of the most innovative universities in the world, Oxford, Cambridge, to name but a couple. And the government is really invested in that growth. I think there are some challenges. The environment in which we operate is very different to the US. It's much more complex. But we are working with our partners to smooth those out.
And any thoughts with the new government that is in now on any changes you may anticipate, or you cannot comment on that? Okay, all right. Understood. Well, thank you so much, Paul, for joining me today. Any parting thoughts for our audience before we head out?
No, I think this has been it's great to see how the space sector in the US is evolving. It'll be interesting to see how that continues to evolve under the new administration. We're all very looking forward to working out how we can partner US more going forward, and the opportunities that brings.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate it.
And thank you too.